It's the Redbird Reboot podcast. Are you ready to get rebooted, Cardinals fans? He settles down, at least in the zone, and does not stop running.
Blake Murphy.
This is the identity for the Arizona Cardinals.
The run defense is just horrendous, and it's been horrendous for the Cardinals for a long time.
And Marcos Labrada.
He's going to bring over his philosophy. It should make it better.
Present the hottest NFL podcast from the country's hottest state.
He should be turning around the logo.
Actually, some breaking news we can cover here. This popped up just about, 6 minutes ago.
It's Redbird Reboot.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans. Welcome in. This is the Redbird Reboot podcast. You've got me and my co-host Marcos Labrada are present. Before the Cardinals game, we've had plenty of areas with planes, trains, automobiles, whatever you want to call it, to be able to make sure that we could get in another pod for you guys this week, just in front of all of what we're seeing right now are some crazy Saturday games. You've got some tied up games with Denver and Cincinnati going in for the playoffs. Unfortunately, the Arizona Cardinals will not be in the playoffs this year. They're eliminated after losing 36-30 to the Carolina Panthers. After falling behind at one point 20-3, they come back on offense for the most part, partially behind James Conner. He goes down. They're able to still get that game to overtime, and ultimately their effort falls short. And Marcos, we would have loved to have talked about this game tonight as the Cardinals being a team that were, when no one expected it, playing for a division title in Week 17, because you win this game this week, win again next week, Rams beat the Seahawks, there would have still been a pretty reasonable shot for the Arizona Cardinals to be able to make it, or at least in contending for it. You could say the season was a success. As it turns out now, we as Arizona Cardinals fans now are looking to next year, but before we get there, there's 2 games left to play.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was kind of disappointing about the fact that this game could have been a even more important game, and there was those rumors about it being flex and whatnot, and it being coming down to hey, these 2 teams are fine to get into the playoffs and being meaningful. And of course, that wasn't anywhere what ended up happening. Instead, we lose to a Panthers team that we should have handled. I'm not shocked that we lose to the Panthers team. They always have our number for some reason. But in this situation, there's no reason for us to have had to lose that game. So really disappointing, but still now we're on to seeing what we have left for the rest of the season. We still got 2 games. That's still a lot of film for us to be able to look at, and still a lot of evaluations that have to take place in order for us to know what we have to do during the offseason.
Absolutely. This is something I think that Cardinals fans are very much looking for when it comes to knowing the future. When it comes to the likes of this year was all about what does the defense look like with a bit more talent, having a secondary, what does the offense look like with a full season from Kyler Murray, adding a huge weapon, adding a pass rusher. What we've really seen, Marcos, has been that whatever you want to say as a Cardinals fan, you start off the season 6-4, and then you finish the season at least on a little bit of a slide. Right now, they've finished it at 1-4. They have a chance to be able to turn it around, which is very fun. They have a chance to be able to essentially go 4-2 in the division and offer a semblance saying, hey, we went in, we didn't do what we came out to do. We've got a lot of young players. We've got another set of draft picks. We've got all of this money that we are going to start to use in free agency after a bit of a reset that Michael Bidwill has gone through. And you also can look at the other perspective, which is if the Cardinals drop the next 2 games, finish 1-6, it's going to be very similar. All of a sudden, you're going to see this Kyler Murray narrative, which we had talked about him potentially overcoming earlier this season. It's going to be a similar narrative of the team starting off fast, being a front runner, and then when pressure heats up, just seeing the team go in a different, unfortunately, downward slope. This is something I think a lot of fans are looking at to see how will the team bounce back. It was definitely one of those games in which, you don't want to question everything, but at the same time, Marcos, you question everything, especially with the likes of how some of the Cardinals players under pressure to a bad team have managed to perform.
Yeah, and obviously the one the number one person, which is numero uno over here, is the one that is getting more of the criticism because during the offseason, now we know, and we're never going to say that, hey, we're gonna find a better option out there at the moment. There are some people that might come into mind, but the truth of the matter is, like, we are gonna stay with him for one more year, and I've mentioned that as well. As critical as I've been about Kyler Murray, there is some criticism thrown to him, more so for like some of the throws and some of the decisions. But we know he's gonna be here for another year, so we had this full year during the offseason. We obviously made our evaluation and said, hey, takes about 8 games for him to get the system. He had his 8 games, but it was just kind of like, hey, he's going to transition from his old system onto this new system. So it's not going to look like, hey, he's going to hit the ground running with Drew Petzing's offense. It was going to be like, we're going to work our offense in. And then he had his offseason, and now this season he's executed the offense and has been good in some instances and bad in some other instances. I would say his play action and his out of pocket game is up there, along with some of the best quarterbacks out there. And it's actually shocking because I didn't think he was going to execute the play action game. So he actually shocked me there. But his in the pocket structure is where he's having his issues, and that's like most of your play calls come from in pocket, like, 2-3 step drops, 5-step drops, ball has to come out, rhythm and timing, and that's where he's been having the issues and stuff. His run game, as you can see from the play we have, that's always been elite. I wish he just implemented that more, like design runs, I mean.
Yeah, and a lot of what we've seen, at least too, I think, has been the narrative on Kyler Murray has, for a lot of cases, I think, and even especially in this game, you're looking at your quarterback to elevate the talent around him, but like we said, the quarterback is also a victim of the performance of a team around him as well. One of the things that stood out, I think, in this game was you finished with the score of giving the Panthers, who've been one of the lowest ranked offenses in the NFL, they put 36 points up on the board against you. Like, your defense has so far been one of the more stellar pieces of this team. Obviously, that's giving them I think it was a 20-3 spot up early is not something that's going to be easy to overcome. That is pretty obvious. The biggest area, of course, is how flat the team came out looking at the start of this week. And we've seen the pattern before of sometimes when going to the East Coast in an early game, it's a road game. We've seen the Cardinals come out flat against the Carolina Panthers before. Most notably, I think, of the 2020 game in which Isaiah Simmons was not getting moved to safety. You ended up with a safety instead starting for Arizona, who got immediately released after the game because it was just a poor performance against the run. Cardinals open up and go 3 and out. They had a essentially third down play with Kyler Murray under pressure, just sails the ball, communication issue with Marvin Harrison Jr. Looked a bit like he was under pressure at the last minute. You can say how much of that's on the quarterback receiver. We kind of can argue about this throughout the season. Fact of the matter is, at least, Marcos, when the Panthers went up 20-3, the Cardinals were able to get back into that game with the defense getting a big play after the Cardinals came back with a nice quick touchdown. You're talking about at least the 36-yard run, I think, at least on the screen pass to James Conner, followed by Conner running into the end zone. Cardinals then force 3 and out and get another touchdown going all the way down at the end of the half with 7 seconds left due to Carolina having a penalty. They put a lot, I noticed in this game, of J.C. Horn on Trey McBride. It's part of why he did not really have one of his more typical games. The second half, however, took place essentially without James Conner. I think James Conner, at least for sure, was getting hurt on one of those plays. The Panthers able to score a touchdown after a field goal exchange between the two of them. And then you kind of have that clutch moment, clutch time. Cardinals, at least, are there. They are down by 3. Panthers could put the game away, at least for the most part, with 6:56 left in the fourth quarter with another touchdown. Instead, the Cardinals defense does, in situations there, stand up. You have a penalty that they have with the Panthers on holding, just wipes things out. You have a incomplete pass on 2nd and 16. All of a sudden, 3rd and 16, they get 6. They end up punting the ball. There's a delay of game on the punt, which puts Arizona into what would be a good field position. You then have the Arizona Cardinals now take over at their own 38-yard line. You have a defensive pass interference call. The Cardinals get pushed back into 2nd and 11, 3rd and 11 now. And this is where we talk about, what does your offense look like? Who steps up when James Conner isn't there? One of the guys that stepped up was Michael Carter, who's able to at least catch the ball after his early fumble, was able to make some plays. Kyler Murray then runs on a essentially scrambled play off a bootleg play action to the right, throws a ball, and it's completely underthrown, almost a replay, play for play of an earlier passing play or two that we've seen in this game. And it gets intercepted at the Carolina 11. You're thinking, okay, this is one of those places, at least, that just, it feels inexcusable at this point for a quarterback to keep having these fourth quarter turnovers. It's a miracle the Cardinals were able to get it into overtime. And it just felt like one of those places, Marcos, where something just seemed broken with the Cardinals and with Kyler Murray to that degree, where they seem to just not be able to get out of their own way in some of these situations, and did end up resulting in the end in not being as critical of a loss. But I think you and I have both talked about one of the places you need to see from Arizona this season from Kyler is him stepping up, and that's something that we have not seen, especially when the pressure has ramped up from opposing teams late in the season. It has not looked like this same Cardinals team.
Yeah, that's been like the main focus of criticism is like, when does he step up, and when has he, actually came in like clutch when we needed to? And obviously, we've had our instances with two different type of coaching staffs, where the coaches, Cliff Kingsbury was the one who got the fault. I always argued about the fact that the defense never got blamed in those situations as well, because the defense also, I mean, let's not sugarcoat it. Even though Kyler Murray didn't have his best game, the defense also didn't have a good game whatsoever. They gave up 36 points to Carolina Panthers and a Bryce Young led team. So we would have never thought this at the beginning of the season, especially with this first couple of games where Bryce Young just looked horrendous. And now after the benching, he's come back. You got to give it to Dave Canales, but there's no excuse. The defense, they didn't play anywhere near as good as they should have. I didn't expect for them to like put up this many points on our team, given that like our defense has actually shown out to be having like at least some progress and being better. I thought that the most they were just going to put up like 17 to 20 points. I still thought it was going to be a difficult game, but 36 with the walk-off touchdown by Chuba Hubbard that I highlighted was like just came down to just horrible tackling, just an embarrassment. And those guys can't be let off the hook, but you also, I think to me, and I know you have your differences in opinions, Blake, about like Kyler Murray, but to me, I didn't like what I saw, like body language wise from the quarterback. I didn't like what I saw from him. And there was a play that I highlighted where he got annoyed, even though he was the one who kind of caused the false start penalty. And it was just like your team's like out there, like thinking to themselves, like, why are you getting mad at me? Why are you getting annoyed at me? Like, I'm not the one who tried to hike the ball with Michael Wilson running across the formation. That was Froho trying to stop a fumble from happening in a turnover. So
yeah, it's tough. It's one of those places. It's one of those places. I'll even go and show like what we have here with this is what we can take a look. I believe that this is the play that we're talking about here from the Chuba Hubbard. These are the three plays that essentially happened in OT. He's able to just run the ball right down Arizona. This is obviously a game in which we did not have the likes of Mac Wilson being back there. You got Owen Papo who's there, but like you said, when it comes to the team being more of a front runner, we've seen some late game plays where Cardinals defense got a stop, Arizona's offense took over. It felt like when there was a penalty on the special teams play and Arizona came in, was not able to essentially go on, because I was thinking, this is it. This is that game-winning drive we're looking for. We're going to see the Cardinals and Kyler drive down the field. They had a penalty. They had to drop back. They had Kyler run backwards, get into a sack, and the Panthers just come right back here, and they basically ice the game after forcing a punt from their own end zone on these two plays right here. Just like you said, a cutback, just not a great job, at least, of tackling for the Cardinals. This is already essentially going to be game over with a made field goal. Just looking at this play right here now, Chuba Hubbard is going to be out for the rest of the season, so he was playing through an injury here, it looks like, as well. But when you talk about being able to look at a simple 5 men up front, having Kaiser White following at least in each of those, this is one of those places, at least, where you're going to have your sight lines be set and be consistent. You can see the other guy who's at least pushing pressure with up the middle. Hubbard, he just does a nice little scoot back over here while Zaven Collins is watching on the bootleg. The person who has to make the tackle right here in Kaiser White gets a little bit held, doesn't get quite there. It's one of those places, at least, where just reading through with how things are going to be set up, you just have them get kind of caught in a nice little coverage play for the most part here, where they're just not able to get that same penetration with, I believe that's going to be Buda Baker, who's running in at least up over here. He's the one who's going to be trying to blitz. He ends up getting kind of pushed back. Great little trap that Arizona fell into ultimately. And that ends up being essentially what would be the game. Unfortunately, Marcos, there's one more little thing that has to go on. And this was kind of the ultimate embarrassment tweet that most fans were sending out after the game. If you hold them to a field goal, you at least have an attempt. Instead, it's the same exact sort of play where guys get sucked up inside. And the tackling that we saw from Sean Murphy bunting was one of the places we've talked about it where it is before. We know that they're going to have to get an upgrade of some sort. It just felt like, at least in the time of it, needing that sort of someone to be able to either make a play, force a fumble, you have the opposite. You end up going and seeing right here in one of these areas where your season kind of comes down to it, just poor wrapping up, at least with the tackling, and he just is able to walk into the end zone. It is game, at least. I think that the season, when it comes down to ultimately one game, Marcos, we can say that about every season because the NFL is fundamentally about all of these 17 games. What I think is unfortunate is, as Cardinals fans, we feel like we've seen this a little bit too often, where when the season comes down to one of these types of areas or plays in a big game, we've seen it with Seattle, we've seen it with them twice, we saw it even with the Vikings game. What we've at least been able to see has been just plays like this where you're wanting the quarterback to be able to make a play. Kyler, we at least even see he's got the likes of Trey McBride right here. He's said, this is something where, in this sort of a situation, you're hoping that the quarterback will not need to be Superman, because you just take the play, get the first down, you can call it there. That's something, at least, that is part of playing within like the idea of structure that you're talking about. Instead, he clutches, pump fakes, and then throws the ball awkwardly for an instant interception. He said, I saw Michael Wilson there, was trying to go and get that to him. And Marcos, really, it felt like when watching that play, it was almost a microcosm of the Kyler Murray season, because he's gotten the Cardinals back into this spot. There was another mistake running out of bounds, but he did manage to at least get them close enough. They called timeout. It was very, very odd, I think, Marcos, to be able to look at just the quarterback post-game when he said the goal was for him to just throw out a touchdown. And what I think we saw here was Kyler tried to be Superman. I say the line between Superman and stupid man in the NFL is one that's very, very set. Now you can see here, he sees that looks like Michael Wilson's wide open. It seems like he's there for the touchdown. The mechanics on this and all of that breaks down for the most part. It just shows that he waited for a second, clutch, pump fake, and was like, oh, I got the guy for the touchdown there. And he just kind of lofts it back over there, doesn't quite finish the action, and Cardinals fans are looking at that one play, and it kind of feels like, have we reached the ceiling for what the Cardinals are going to be able to have with a Kyler Murray? And I think the answer to that is, I don't think that we have, but I think it's worth discussing what that ceiling may look like, especially given the fact that we have a Rams game with Matthew Stafford, who's an aging quarterback. They've got some great receivers back that weren't there the first time. Should be a game that you can get Marvin Harrison Jr. some open looks against this secondary. They beat them up the first time around. And then you've got a Niners team that has just been reeling. If you're a Cardinals fan, you're looking at this Panthers game and saying, hey, it'll be a little too late if you're going to be kind of going off against it here. But what you're looking for, at least for the Cardinals, is, can you have that backbone to be able to snap back when nothing is there to play for? And I think a lot of Cardinals fans have looked at Kyler Murray and don't believe that to be the case. And I think it's up to him to have to use these games to prove them wrong.
Yeah, there was a little bit of talks about maybe sitting him out for the rest of the season and just having Clayton Tune, but we all knew that wasn't going to happen. I believe it just has to do with evaluation, and also just kind of like knowing that I know for a fact, like, not only was the coaching staff supposed to be on board with like, hey, Kyler Murray's our future, but also Monty Ossenfort. So just to like show the rest of the season that if he has like really good games and whatnot, it's like, hey, look, guys, sorry, the season didn't go like the season was actually better than what we expected in the building process. We did so we went over expectations. Even Kyler Murray said before the season started, take the over on the over and under. So technically speaking, we did see an improvement. Obviously, we know our own capabilities and whatnot, and it's still a disappointment to us because we're like, we had the playoffs right there, and then we took ourselves out of it. We had our 4 game run where we were doing really well and winning games and looking like an improvement. Jonathan Gannon was getting Coach of the Year, like chatter. Kyler Murray was getting MVP chatter, and then after the bye week came on, it's just like that. That's just those were gone. So that's where the disappointment comes from. So I think these last 2 games are just evaluation. They're going to go ahead and see, okay, he beat up on the Los Angeles Rams in the second game of the season.
Mm-hmm.
Can he do it again, even though the Rams are now more healthier and they've improved? They look bad during the beginning of the season. Now they're better. And what is he going to look like against the 49ers, which that shouldn't be a problem. 49ers are weak right now. They have so many injuries. So it's going to be one of those like, hey, this is going to be a gauge for the rest of the season. And plus, I think we'll end up with like a 9-8 record if we win these last 2 games. So that's going to be looking like a positive for the offseason to build on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's something where when we take a look at least at just the matchup between this Cardinals and Rams team, feels like that the Rams are a team that we've seen kind of rising, a team that outdueled Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills a few weeks ago. And a Cardinals team in which is really post-bye has just completely struggled at least to be able to put together whatever semblance of a team. Now, granted, the inconsistencies that we saw early in the season kind of been replaced with what has been a more consistent output, while at the same time, it really does seem like the Arizona Cardinals are a team that has been kind of on... I think there's not really a better way to be able to say it outside of they've been a team that has not gotten healthier, gotten guys back. They've been a team that's been a bit worse, and they got some really intriguing matchups in this game, Marco. So let's take a look here at least and this will be a fun point, I think, of comparison when you take a look at the Pro Football Focus grades for each team. Those of you who are at least watching over there in our chat, you'll be able to see it on screen. For those who are not, you're able to see a general trend of Arizona having some weak games against the Bills, against the Packers, like grades around 58 or so. You can see some median styles, at least, against the Commanders was a rough game, and then an elite game against the Rams, the Jets, and some strong games against the Chargers, Dolphins, and the Chicago Bears, who, of course, have gone pretty much AWOL the rest of the season for Chicago. The last stretch of the season, they've been consistently middling. The grades for each game has, for the most part, gotten worse, with the exception of the Patriots game. You can see the biggest difference from the start of the season to the end of the season, Marcos, has been the tackling for the team has gone down. The passing has deteriorated a little bit for the most part. And while the run game for Arizona was super high last week, we did notice that this is the worst rushing defense in the NFL. When James Conner left, you kind of can't blame it in some degree, because if you're missing running back 1, running back 2, and running back 3, it gets really hard to be able to, with the 4th string guy, be able to do anything. While at the same time, the Cardinals were able to come back, and really those clutch situations ended up being a thing that popped up. It does at least beg the question of, if the strength of this team has not necessarily been their pass rush, if it's not been their run defense, if their tackling has gotten a bit worse, but the coverage has been, consistent. When we compare to what we've seen from the Rams the last few weeks, we've seen some elite offensive output as they've gotten Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp both back from injury. We saw them struggle some with the Niners against the pass, with Nick Bosa playing a game that was pretty important. They come out at least, and while they didn't have the biggest offensive output, they at least were very solid against a scrappy New York Jets team. And you talk about how the schedule has looked for the Rams. A loss to the Eagles, which looked like they could be in contention for the number 1 or for sure number 2 seed. A bad Saints team against the Bills, the Niners, and division's tough, and then the Jets. This really comes down to the Rams at least have won 8 of their last 10 games, and they're going with 2 divisional games to end the season. This is kind of the Sean McVay against the Arizona Cardinals matchup, Marcos. What I'm looking for in this game is to be able to say, if you're the Cardinals, people are probably expecting you tonight to get blown out. There have been elite offensive outputs. Your defense has struggled with tackling. You are looking at a defense for the Rams, which has been, for the most part, pretty average, unless they're playing the Niners. and is not tackled well at all in the run game. James Conner is active for Arizona. I think that, to me, this is a no excuses type of game for the offense. You want to see the big three, as far as the weapons, Kyler, Marv, and Trey in the passing game. You want to see James Conner at least be able to do something in the running game against what's been a okay, not great Rams defense this year, especially with Marv being able to get this secondary a second time. But with how elite the Rams offense have been, and with the Cardinals giving up 36 points to the Rams last week, I think that the win for the Cardinals team is, if you say you're not going to get blown out, I think that's at least going to show some heart, show some fight, is going to be by keeping it close in the fourth quarter. Then if your defense just lets you down again, that's something you kind of can't really make a choice about, because you're just not playing in the same ballpark with how these defensive injuries have been. While at the same time, a win against this Rams team would not just, I think, go a far way for a lot of Cardinals fans in general, just for off of last week's debacle. It'd go a far way for Kyler Murray as well.
Yeah, exactly. It I think it'd go further for Kyler Murray than anybody at this moment, other than Marvin Harrison Jr. If like Kyler Murray has himself like two good solid outings and whatnot, and of course no like interceptions, no like weird like decision making and whatnot, and if Marvin Harrison Jr. can like at least get one good game out of these last two, people would set off their misconceptions about him, basically talking about how he's just not going to be the person who's going to live up to a contract, even though he's a rookie, or like, not a contract, but a career, even though he's a rookie and whatnot. And I'm really, really pulling for Trey McBride to go over 1,000 yards. So he doesn't have much to go.
That touchdown.
Got that touchdown. Yeah, exactly. 1,000 yards in that touchdown, get that extension during the offseason, and then next year get reset and whatnot, and then have another full off season of hopefully retooling and getting better.
Absolutely. Looking at the specific matchups here, let me go ahead and get this expanded for y'all who are watching on our live stream. Thanks for tuning in, by the way. We are talking about some really intriguing matchups against each other because the Rams cornerbacks pretty bad. Witherspoon has been average to below average. Same thing as far as with Williams, who's been their cornerback one. This is one of those places where you would expect Marvin Harrison Jr. to be able to get opportunities in this game. You would expect James Conner against the likes of Braden Fisk, and I think it's going to be, I can't remember his first name, Brown. And then with Young on the other side, they have just not been the best as far as for being able to defend the run. This is something where you would hope that the Cardinals can come out, be able to run the ball, keep it under control, be able to get the ball to their weapons against some of these guys in coverage, in Harrison and McBride, similar to what we saw the first time around. The biggest thing that you're going to have to watch, though, is I think the player to watch in this game is going to be Kelvin Beachum, because Jared Verse has looked like a top 10 pass rusher this season after a rough start. He's really come around. If he's able to get penetration with the Cardinals, along with Kobe Turner up front with an offensive line that, from what we've seen, Marcos, has not looked the same as far as being able to defend against the pass, has been still decent against the run. That, I think, is going to be the biggest matchup overall that I'm going to be watching, because if that ends up being enough of a play where the offense isn't able to get going, it's going to make things pretty difficult, because this Cardinals defense against this Rams team, they don't have a single matchup that favors them for the most part on that offensive line. The only one that even comes close is going to be looking at Zaven Collins against the backup to Rob Havenstein, because he is out for this game. So you got Zaven Collins. You want to see if he can go off and get a sack or two against a bad backup tackle. Otherwise, this is a spot where the Cardinals, in my opinion, are going to have to be ready for Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp. You're going to have, in the nickel coverage, I think, you're going to probably see quite a bit of coverage from Garrett Williams on Cooper Kupp, which is a matchup I'm looking forward to. Those guys are probably going to battle back and forth all game. You're probably going to, at some point, have to figure out the right way to deal with Puka Nacua, because the way that he and Stafford have played this season, to me, that's one of those matchups where I think that if you're the Cardinals, what you want to see tonight is you're able to run the ball, put up points on the board, you're able to get after the quarterback in Matthew Stafford, and knowing that you may not be able to stop this Rams offense, But if you can be able to slow it enough, on 3rd down and 6, get a pass breakup from Williams on Cup, be able to make sure that Kyron Williams stays out of the end zone. Those are all, I think, positives for this team. What I think you can't have, Marcos, would be one of those typical Sean McVay Rams blow the cards out 32-17 sort of games. To me, that puts a lot of things into jeopardy for Arizona moving forward, because you're in a spot where you've had the division for years for the taking. You need to get more talent involved, but you kind of have seen these consistent areas of collapse, which at some point you're wondering how taxing is it going to be, where you look at the Cardinals and their situation, kind of how the Rams looked at Jared Goff at one point, and you saw a change of some sort needing to be made.
Yeah, exactly. First overall pick, Jared Goff, like being carted off for another first overall pick, and Matthew Stafford, and immediately all this stuff that Matthew Stafford was able to do in that Sean McVay offense to like not only elevate them, but like overall just like execute everything on the offensive side. It's just crazy to think that's what happened. And then Jared Goff goes over to the Lions, and now he's having himself quite the career over there. Being able to do things that he wasn't able to do in his early career. So it's surprising how the evolution of these two players has not only gone up, but we know that Stafford is on the downhill of his career, and Jared Goff is on the come up of his career. It'll be seen whether he can win the Super Bowl or not. But, that's kind of what we're looking at with Kyler Murray. Did he hit a ceiling? Did he plateau? And is he coming back down? Are we going to be able to hopefully have him ascend so that way we can be that competitive team? Or is this what we're going to see from Kyler Murray? It's like I said, the last 2 games are going to say a lot. Overall, you're going to get the big picture, obviously, because that's how you get a proper evaluation. But these last 2 games, he's going to have the most pressure on him because he knows he's in the spotlight.
Absolutely. So that is great. I'm very curious to see. I probably am going to pick the Rams in this game, considering what we've seen from Arizona. It is going to be, I believe, though, this is going to be a road game to be able to finish up for the most part, which will be interesting to see for the Niners game next week, at least at home for Arizona. And I believe it is at home game in January. Let's talk a bit about what we hinted at a little bit at the beginning of the show, which is the conversation. After 2 years of this Jonathan Gannon, Nick Rallis, Drew Petzing, and Kyler Murray staff, what we've seen, been a lot of questions people have had about, people have wondered, hey, do we start a Murray conversation? Has Marvin Harrison Jr. disappointed enough that some fans at least are looking at that pick and saying we should have drafted this player or this guy? One of the things I think at least is that when it comes down to it, I ended up posting the idea of, all right, if you're going to move off of Kyler Murray, let's take a look at what does that realistically look like. And I think there's 2 different angles to look at it. The first one, at least, is if you move off of Kyler, then who? Well, I mean, it depends on what your goal is. If your goal is to win more games now and you move off of the quarterback, you're going to be in a spot where you're probably not going to be able to find a guy who's an upgrade without giving up multiple first-round picks and getting in a quarterback who's of that caliber. And of those, Stafford was one of those quarterbacks who actually was available. There's not going to really be a Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson. You want to talk about an elite level quarterback who's going to be available for trade where you can throw a quarterback back in. That's not going to be the case. You also are talking about a Cardinals team which at this point is still in the middle of rebuilding. This isn't a Cardinals team that, like the Rams, was feeling, if we upgrade from Jared Goff, we push for this, trade all these draft picks away, we can get a Super Bowl, and then they did get a Super Bowl. More likely what you'd be doing is you'd probably be either having to look at having a guy who you feel like can be an improvement over Kyler Murray in some areas, such as, we've talked about Kyler making plays out of structure versus Kyler in the pocket. The comparison I've made is you look at Russell Wilson, his shorter stature, you look at Geno Smith, and be able to put things together from those angles. You can say, hey, the Seahawks have not gotten closer to winning Super Bowls, but look at all the talent they brought in when they did move off of Russ. Look at how Geno's played super well. Look how a lot of things have really lined up for that Seahawks team, where if the Rams end up losing to the Cardinals tonight, which I think we could say we're not pulling for any of these NFC West teams, but somebody has to win it, they're going to be in great position to be able to take the division with a win next week. That's something that's going to be really interesting, I think, Marcos, because a lot of fans have kind of wanted to have something unrealistic, which is, I want to get a different quarterback than Kyler Murray. It's also a place where they want to win games now and make the playoffs. And I don't know how those two things perfectly line up together, Marcos, because you're talking then about a building Cardinals team that has improved their win total, that gets back in there. And now you're saying, all right, we're going to move out for this guy. Some fans have said he's got no value if you trade him. It's very interesting, I think, to be able to ask and see. And this is maybe that take a step back from the feelings that you can have as a fan and then go realistically. Is the team going to be able to win more games next year with, say, bringing a Sam Darnold in on a giant contract and trading in a Kyler Murray, bringing a Kirk Cousins in? We've seen that the level of quarterbacks that are usually available in free agency, with the Vikings and Darnold being maybe the exception versus the rule, it's probably not going to be a place where you can upgrade from the likes of a Kyler Murray, at least. You probably would have to do it through a draft pick for the most part, which I think is going to be a second conversation. But that, I think, is something that's really hard for a lot of fans to understand. And I agree with you, the body language, the other stuff. It does seem like this is probably where the Cardinals are going to be at their best for now. The question, of course, is that something that's good enough for Cardinals fans?
No, I mean, we're especially with the QB market that we have going on, we're not going to be able to get anything that's going to be anything great. I mean, Sam Darnold, I believe he's going to stay, or at least if he's smart enough, he'll want to stay with Minnesota because that's where he found his success, obviously. And I think McCarthy, JJ McCarthy, is going to be at his heels, but I don't think he's going to threaten to like start over Sam Darnold, especially with the way he's playing. So it'll behoove him for him to stay because too often do quarterbacks have success with a team. They go somewhere else because they're like, oh, give him the big contract, and then they start failing because of the fact that it's like, yeah, that system and the players that he had a connection with probably helped him to be able to put up the monster numbers that he did. Kirk Cousins is a definite no. They have to run in the pistol almost exclusively.
He can't run anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, his knee, like he has to hand the ball off, so he can't do under center action, which is what we see with Drew Petzing's offense. He can't even get out there to hand the ball over to his running back. So that's a definite no. I think instead of trying to move off him, try to bring in more competition for Kyler Murray. That's what I would do. There's been talks about maybe bringing in there's a quarterback from the Steelers, the one that's behind Russell Wilson at the moment. There's talks about bringing him in. I would consider doing that. So that would be my suggestion. You got to kind of light a fire under Kyler Murray to be able to at least up the competition for him.
Yeah, and that's where I think maybe I'm a little different from where you stand on that, Marcos, because I can be more all or nothing on the quarterback market. And I think if you say we're going to bring in competition, let's even just say you bring in like, let's just say you bring in a quarterback like Jameis who's going to turn it over a lot more, throws it more. Let's say you bring in someone who's like a Ryan Tannehill, who's been essentially not playing this year, who's a veteran quarterback who's been in a very, very similar system for the most part. There's a lot of questions, at least for the most part, about doesn't that really in some cases mean you don't have as much faith in your quarterback to begin with? And that's where I think I can fall on the path of, if you're going to say, well, we need to bring competition for this guy, to me it kind of feels like you're then admitting, well, we don't believe really fully in this guy enough where we have to bring in someone else. And a lot of times what we've seen in the NFL is that when you bring in competition for a guy, because you don't have that belief in that guy, it turns out that guy ends up kind of feeling like that lack of faith and trust that's in him has him bottom out. The number one thing I think of was when the Philadelphia Eagles had Carson Wentz to this large contract. They draft Jalen Hurts in the second round. And everyone's like, why are they doing this? And the answer ended up being they needed competition for Carson Wentz. They felt they needed to push him. And it turned out to be a solid move because Carson Wentz ended up very quickly falling apart and collapsing, getting traded away to the Colts, collapsing there, and now he's backing up Patrick Mahomes. He's of no threat to someone like Pat Mahomes, and I think that's where it comes down to. Is Kyler Murray a franchise quarterback has been the question people have asked. Some people have said yes, some people say no, and I think you have to define what franchise quarterback is, because I think everyone will define it a bit different. You're talking about Kyler as the guy who goes out, plays 16 games of the year, puts up about 3,200 passing yards, 500 to 600 rushing yards, throws for about 20 touchdowns. And every once in a while, you've got a big season where he gets up to 30, 35 touchdowns, throws for a few more thousand yards. The defense plays great. That's kind of where I think you can talk about is that's that top 10 to 15 type quarterback in the league. That's going to be more of like what we see with the Cowboys and Dak Prescott, you see with Matt Ryan, and it's what we saw the Seahawks have with Russell Wilson post Legion of Boom. They were able to at least have that guy who's a franchise level quarterback. I think that Kyler is of that degree. Some don't think he's at that level for where it is yet. And I think some of it too is I think that a lot of people are looking at the superstar quarterbacks. Mahomes and Allen, the top two, but Justin Herbert, how he's been this year, getting the Chargers to the playoffs despite no receivers, having how you're talking about a superstar talent like Lamar Jackson, obviously, is going to be up there. Talking about Joe Burrow is one of the best examples, at least, of a guy who is a bad defense. Right now, it's 24-24. They're battling Denver. Looks like that game is already going to overtime. Those are the kind of quarterbacks who ultimately define the position. What we've seen so far with Kyler Murray, I think, has been a star when it comes to running the ball, capable of some star plays, but also a lot of inconsistencies that haven't quite gotten him into anything higher than that 10 to 12 type of level quarterback, similar to how a Kirk Cousins has been a guy who can pump up the stat sheet and then have a downer Monday Night Football game. Like, that's where I think the question for me then, Marcus, is, okay, if Kyler Murray can be a franchise quarterback, it's different from a Daniel Jones. You paid the guy, you got to get off that contract. Carson Wentz, you paid the guy, got to get off of that contract. I don't think we're there yet as the Cardinals. But if you're saying that the goal for the Cardinals is you want Kyler Murray to be a star or superstar quarterback, you kind of have to accept in year 6 or 7, this is really kind of what you have in Kyler Murray, and it's probably going to be a peak that he's going to have at some point. Maybe that peak is already passed. Maybe that peak is coming in 2025 or 26. But for the most part, that is something, Marcos, that I think what a lot of fans have wanted is that franchise and star quarterback. And I'll pose that question to you. Is it worth for the Cardinals to try to go and get that star quarterback, even if potentially means that the team moves off of Kyler Murray, decides that, hey, we're going to be bad for a year in 2025. We're going to then load up, get a rookie quarterback who we think can be a superstar in 2026. And then maybe you've got a franchise that's set for the next 10 years at a higher level versus accepting that you're also risking quite a bit moving off of that quarterback. Like how the Browns moved off of Baker Mayfield, you could then look at a despondent Cardinals team for the next couple of years that just seems to go nowhere. It's not an easy decision to make, honestly, Marcos.
Yeah, it gets general managers fired when you make the wrong decision. That I will say that, like, if they make the decision and Kyler Murray actually gets elevated, then it's going to be like Monty Ossenfort's going to get fired. Justin Fields was the guy I was thinking about, by the way. I would really think that maybe adding somebody like him to this roster would help, like, at least light a fire under Kyler Murray, because we haven't really gotten ourselves any kind of like backup that could threaten that position. Even though, like, we do have like some question marks about whether he can even make it the whole entire season, and for our own benefit, we'd want to have somebody that's good at that backup position. But we for now, the options that we have are just like really, like, they're not bad. I mean, they're bad. I mean, they're not good is what I was trying to say. And we will be rolling the dice. I believe we're going to be rolling the dice, not this draft, but next draft, because this draft, there's a bunch of maybes. If somebody like Cam Ward drops to a favorable position, that could be maybe the pick, but that's not going to
Cam against Kyler Murray would still be, to some degree, it'd be basically a bit, not only a downgrade, you're still saying we're taking on Kyler Murray's cap hit. And we're going to do that for a year with the rookie. Yeah, we're doing it next year. So you're not going to be able to get as many guys filled. It's going to be a rough rookie season for the most part. I think that this is what I said, at least, too, is you also want to look at market value. If you're the Cardinals entering this offseason, you say, you know what? We want to basically say this Kyler Murray has been left over from the Cliff Kingsbury, Steve Keim era. we feel like that with Monty and with Gannon, that there is a personality, there's a type, there's something that we know that we can go out there and get. And I think they've said all the right things. But at the end of the day, if you said I would rather trust Monty Austinfort to draft a quarterback than Steve Keim and Cliff Kingsbury to draft a quarterback, and now maybe with what we've seen from Cliff, maybe that's all, like we said before, he knows how to evaluate QBs, at least is one thing. Then I think you would have to almost tear the Band-Aid off now, because there's only two quarterbacks this year, and Shadur Sanders and Cam Ward, like you mentioned. And I don't think any of those guys are even on the caliber of last year's quarterbacks. We've seen Caleb Williams, despite all of the problems in Chicago, the inaccuracies, he's still going to be the first Bears quarterback that's probably going to play in all 17 games since ever. It feels like since the 80s, I think, at least, because they've either been benched or hurt, or they just have had so many issues. Jaden Daniels looks like he's going to have competition with Bo Nix for the Offensive Rookie of the Year, as Bo Nix is leading the Broncos in overtime in a must-win, do-or-die sort of playoff scenario. You also have Drake May, who's been putting up some incredible plays, whether in or out of structure, despite having next to no talent around him. They played the Buffalo Bills as hard as the Arizona Cardinals did week one, and that's something that is worth mentioning. You also have J.J. McCarthy on a loaded Vikings team. Michael Penix Jr. is taking over for Kirk Cousins now. There was not a demand for a franchise quarterback last year. It was the year previously, with seeing Aaron Rodgers move to the Jets, seeing Russell Wilson moving with the Broncos. This is one of those years where when you take a look at the top of the draft, there's a lot of teams who need quarterbacks. And here's the thing, Marcos. Out of all those teams that need quarterbacks, there are not enough to go around. Whereas next year, I think, is supposed to be a better quarterback class. You've got Peyton's nephew, you've got Drew Aller, there's another guy at least coming out of LSU. Like, it's at least expected to be a bit better of a quarterback class. This year's supposed to be a defensive heavy class, as well as a good offensive line class. You also have, of course, the one Heisman guy in Ashton Gianti. Local Cardinals fans and ASU fans are wanting to see if they could take a Cam Scadaboo at least to add to a strong rushing attack. I'm not sure that they would, but these teams over here, the Browns, yeah, they are probably going to have the most expensive backup quarterback in NFL history. If they need a quarterback, the Raiders, they've won a lot of games. They need a quarterback. The Jets, they have 42-year-old Aaron Rodgers needing a quarterback. The Saints, there's so many that are here. We can't be thinking quarterback in the first round. Trading Kyler Murray for draft picks does not make sense to taking a quarterback here. I think if you have to look at that, you would have to say, hey, could I have Monty Austinfort call up his old buddies at the Titans and say, hey, you got a number 4 pick over here for the most part. You're rebuilding your team. What if you said you wanted to trade Kyler for, say, a second rounder this year and your first rounder next year? And then, you know what? We'll give you a 5th. You give us your 3rd. We'll avoid that top 4 pick, like how we know that you don't really want to, depart from that top 4 pick. If there's 2 quarterbacks that go off the board, at least for the most part, like that with the Titans, or if you say, hey, we don't like Cam Ward, he's a second rounder in our books. Maybe the Raiders are a team that loses. They fall up into that 4th overall spot. With the Titans moving up one more. There's all sorts of different areas that you talk about the Cardinals maybe getting picks for 2026. Then you say, bring in a veteran like we have a Jacoby Brissett and a Jameis Winston. They're able to push up some stats. You're able to probably have a nice 6-10 win season. If you get more talent from some draft picks, you trade up from that spot. That would be similar from the Buffalo Bills moving up for a Josh Allen. If you're going to say that this is a realistic way of upgrading from Kyler Murray, I think that is the only route that you'll be able to find, unless you find a disgruntled star quarterback who wants out of their spot. You have to then plan for 2026. And Marcos, I don't know if that's good to take this Cardinals team and then basically put them through another losing season. You only do that, to me, is if you feel like Kyler is not going to be the guy at all and you have to get a different guy in to be able to improve. And I am just not sold that this team isn't just going to be able to say, we can run it back next year, be an 11-win team, add all of these pieces. There's what Cardinals fans want, and then there's what Cardinals fans are going to get. Those are 2 different things. I think we'll talk more about this as we enter the offseason, but to me, fundamentally, if you're going to be realistically with the Cardinals fan, I don't think that you can move on from Kyler Murray and achieve your goal of getting winning football in the desert. Not because he's the only option or the best option, but it's one of those cases of where right now, as far as it goes, You don't have a Geno Smith on the sidelines. You don't have another type of guy you can be able to bring in. You are in a very unique spot as the Cardinals in terms of having a quarterback who is good enough to be able to get you to the playoffs, even if the team isn't going to be an elite team. And at the same time, there's a lot of questions Cardinals fans have of can he enter that elite range? What we've seen is he has been more elevated by talent around him than truly elevating a lot of the talent we've seen in the Cards this year.
Yeah, well, like I said, these last 2 games and all these scenarios are just gonna work. They're just gonna play out how they play out. I still think obviously this coaching staff and this general manager were in on Kyler Murray when they took the job. So I think they're not going to even think about it during the offseason. They're going to give it another shot. If they're going to give it another shot with Drew Petzing, though, that's going to be the question, because I know that there's a lot of people wanting him to move on and stuff. I don't know if that's the greatest choice. You don't want to just restart another offense and then restart the evaluation process again and be like, okay, what does Kyler Murray look at in this offense and whatnot? Well, that's going to be like the 3rd different offenses that he's going to be in. So it's hard to do a proper evaluation on that, especially since this is what people were asking for. They were asking for a more like, hey, Kyler Murray, let's not make him be Superman every player. Hey, put him under center and this and that. Well, that's what they're doing, and now people are complaining about that. So, like I said, those scenarios, I don't know. Like that is a lot. That would be obviously the viable option outside of just keeping him. But I think it's not going to be this year. I think next year they're really going to start thinking about quarterback if they run it back and it looks the same.
Right. And that's something of I think we haven't even talked about with what Drew Petzing has looked like and how the passing offense has not improved. I think you have to identify how much of that is on the quarterback, how much of the coordinator. Potentially, Marcos, it could be both. I think that you'd probably say if you're going to rip the Band-Aid off, I would say do it now if it comes to it, versus a year in advance. But I'm also the one who would say I trust the coaching staff who are here, the strong run game with having James Conner to support one of those types of players that you're able to, bring in off the streets, being able to see what some other guy has. I'm also not the guy who has to worry about getting canned because I traded away Kyler Murray and then my team ends up winning, 4 or 5 games and there ends up being one great quarterback in the draft next year. And I kind of do where the Broncos are this year, where you've got an awesome built up team that has a rookie that probably has a capped ceiling, while at the same time, you're able to win a few more games now with a great Sean Payton as play caller. It's definitely an interesting case. I think these last 2 games are going to be huge because I want to see tonight Kyler Murray be able to actually prove and perform that he can win, be able to get that actual winning record in the NFC West the next 2 games, be able to at least go 4-2. If not that, 3-3 is at least good enough for me. And I also want to see Kyler under Drew Petzing be able to show that this is a passing game that really is just needing to grow and develop. If we don't see that over the next 2 weeks, it's going to be hard for me to see them renew Drew Petzing's contract, because if you bring back all 3 of those guys, Kyler, Marv, and Petzing next year, that's a sizable enough risk for Jonathan Gannon that you don't want to have that be the case. And suddenly you're a defensive coach who's scrambling to fix the offense. We've seen this happen a time or 2 before with the likes of Steve Wilkes and with other coaches in the NFL. The hope is that you're able to evaluate properly. We enter this offseason, and let's see if Cardinals fans have something to cheer about tonight, or if we're coming back the next day saying just lose this game to the Niners, get the draft pick. It's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out, Marcos. And with that, we're about 10 minutes away from kickoff, so we are going to head out now. Thank you guys so much again for tuning in online. This has been the Redbird Reboot podcast. If you guys are willing to be able to go ahead and follow our show, it should be Redbird Reboot on YouTube. I think the QR code, like you said, Marcos, is having some issues right now, so just make sure you search Redbird Reboot at least on YouTube. You'll be able to then follow up with anytime the show comes on. You'll be able to turn on notifications. Follow us at least as well on x.com. I'm Blake Murphy 7. You can follow him at Pancake Soul. This has been the Redbird Reboot podcast, and with that, guys, it's time for us to log off. Take care and have a good one. Let's go, Cardinals. We got 2 games left in the division. Let's see if they can get it done, despite the fact that the playoffs are now just a far-off dream.